Welcome to HumanFuel, a gentle pause and a breath of clarity on your journey towards well-being, authentic power, and inner transformation. We bring together diverse healers to explore what it means to thrive in body, in mind, in spirit, and in our society. One breath, one honest conversation, one tool at a time. Welcome to episode 6. Today we are taking South Africa to therapy, guys, and getting to the bottom of what the true cost of an unhealed society is. As a platform that aims to help you refuel in this busy, crazy, and dynamic society, we want to know what it means to be well, whole, and human in South Africa today. In the previous episode, we touched on Self-Healing 101, which aims to address wellness at an individual level. But I'm learning that that is just one level of healing. There are at least 4, and they are all important. Think of it like the kitchen, the bathroom, the bedroom, and the lounge in your house. All of the areas need attention. I have done a lot of work in systemic and societal healing. This can fall within transformation work in South Africa and touches on justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging work. And let me tell you, I got burnt out and quite stressed from trying to work on this one room as all the other rooms were also on fire. And what I'm realizing is that a part of the solution that is needed here is an understanding and applying of more systemic, multi-leveled healing or well-being, or call it transformation efforts that are also more practical. And it cannot get more practical than hearing an increasing number of South African TikTokers, and from doing my own research, when we find that the average population in South Africa is struggling to cope financially in managing their lives, which is causing a lot of mental health strain. I found some more explanations here. The constant worry about paying bills, meeting basic needs, or maintaining stability leads to chronic stress, which can trigger or worsen anxiety disorders. Financial hardships can create feelings of helplessness, low self-esteem, and hopelessness, often resulting in depressive symptoms or clinical depression. Money worries can disrupt sleep patterns. This can lead to insomnia and poor quality of sleep, which can worsen overall mental health. Financial difficulties often also cause shame and embarrassment, leading people to withdraw socially and avoid support networks, which increases loneliness and mental health struggles. The mental load of financial stress can impair concentration, decision-making, and memory, making it harder to problem solve or seek help. Some individuals may turn to alcohol, drugs, and other unhealthy coping mechanisms to numb emotional pain that is caused by financial stress. Money problems can cause tension, arguments, and breakdowns in families and partner relationships. Apparently, one of the top reasons of the high divorce rates in South Africa is financial abuse. And lastly, financial strain can often limit our access to mental health resources. Now, I can't afford therapy or medication or any other support, which creates a cycle where the problem worsens without professional help. Now, please remember, this is a subset of the South African population that is struggling to cope. Now imagine a subset of the population that is living in poverty, the unemployed, the disempowered, or the aggrieved. What problem does this create? Of course, as a society, and I'm not sure if all nations do this, but we immediately make jokes about it. And perhaps this is the most available coping mechanism to us. And am I toxic for experiencing a micro relief from all the humor we make out of our problems, Mzant? Have you seen the SABS, a comedic play of the SABC? Oh, it's comic gold, I tell you. And if we were to also just be serious about addressing some of these issues, though, I think we can all agree that our problems cannot be healed away with breath work or a one-on-one therapy session. So eat that money.
Eat that money. And what are you doing now?
Yes,
I
like,
am eating
as a
this
healer
money.
and teacher, jokes aside, sometimes I catch myself really listening in and I feel the weight of the pain and suffering behind the jokes and find myself asking the questions. How can we heal the roots of these issues? How are violence, anxiety, poverty, unemployment, and trauma all connected today? What would real healing, and not just at one level, but so deep and wide, healing actually look like in a society like ours? And from Human Fuel today, we go beneath the surface of well-being and attempt to start answering these questions. And welcome back. If you're here for the first time, Molweni, I am Dr. Joy, work psychologist, multi-dimensional healer, and your host for this episode. Often I will invite other healers onto Human Fuel to offer a broader perspective, but I'll be driving this episode solo and we are cruising nicely. The title for this episode is Who Pays the Mental Health Bill? I'm taking the nation to therapy. And to lay the foundation of this session, there are three parts in how I'd like to lead us. The first part is how our individual mental health and social well-being are connected. Part two, an unpacking of reparations and rehabilitation in post-apartheid South Africa at 31 years of democracy. I think we're growing up to take ourselves to therapy at this point and want true solutions and answers, not just surface level stuff. Part three, to map out our healing journey collectively, recommending what needs to change individually, systemically, and as a nation. So, what we are learning is that mental health is not just about the individual, it's a mirror of a society we live in. And right now, the reflection is fractured. Let's look at it from a psychological perspective. Social psychology teaches us that people are shaped by their environments. Inequality, violence, exclusion, injustice directly affects brain development, stress responses, and belief systems. And this is a lot of work that was done by Bandura in 1986, but many other people who have contributed into this space. For example, Maslow's hierarchy of needs reminds us, how can people self-actualize when safety, belonging, and dignity are their daily struggles? In communities where basic needs aren't met, where past violence was never acknowledged, and where hope has no infrastructure, mental health cannot thrive. So here are some drivers of psychosocial distress. Historical trauma that's passed down across generations, collective shame or silence, communities carrying grief without words or witnesses. And this is a big one for me, because I've really experienced it when looking at my mother and my grandmother and their way of just easily assuming silence when aggrieved, when they're experiencing gross inequality, which is something that's sort of passed down to me, but perhaps we are part of the generation that is calling that out and saying the buck ends here, feeling all of the grief, feeling all of the shame, and calling it out. Um, Lastly, ongoing structural exclusion also contributes to psychosocial distress. People are still economically and spatially locked out of opportunities. I mean, you can just look at informal settlements that sprout out from different areas close to industry and the CBDs around the nation, actually. And here are some other interesting key stats that paint a nation's picture right now. South Africa is the most unequal country in the world. Percent of youth in South Africa are either unemployed, disconnected, and disillusioned. Depression is now the leading cause of disability globally, which is made worse by poverty and violence. This is from the World Health Organization. Violence and crime are at an all-time high. And guess what? You cannot treat community depression with a pill or a feel-good wellness day. You need justice, okay? You need acknowledgement and you need ongoing repair. So, from this part of our session, I want you to know three important things that lay the foundation for the rest of our conversation. First, self and collective repair are connected. This means that well-being at an individual level is related to societal well-being, ergo, our ability to collectively thrive, essentially. The stats around our societal dysfunction are not random. They are deeply rooted in a past and what we do with our present and future. Well-being at a holistic and collective level should include reparation and rehabilitation. So let's talk about reparation and its psychological impact. Part 2. South Africa's approach to reparations has been symbolic, partial, and politicized. Yo, English. Leaving wounds unhealed and voices unheard. What was promised by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission recommendations was 17,000 Rand per year over 6 years to victims of gross human rights violations, memorialization, public education, trauma support, and community rebuilding. And community-based reparations like clinics, schools, and cultural revitalization. What was done, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I am teachable. What I found so far was financially 30,000 Rand once off to select victims. So when you still hear talks about wanting economic power and not just political power, this is where some of the roots issues lie. Okay, let's look at the issue of land restitution. There has been limited return of land or a very small financial payouts. This has been done through very bureaucratic delays, and urban land has been ignored. So President Trump, dear Donald Trump, recently highlighted this issue with our President Cyril Ramaphosa, and that sparked a lot of debate. Affirmative action, BE, and employment equity. This has been criticized with helping just an elite few and leaving structural inequalities intact. I mean, I still have like white people that will say stuff like, I guess you don't have to worry about unemployment. Hey, Joy, and things like that. Lastly, symbolic reparations, such as the renaming of streets and building of museums, etc. These were important, but insufficient without material justice. So, okay, West Street is now Dr. Pixley Gesema, who was a prominent anti-apartheid activist and South Africa's first black lawyer. It's a indigenous name. Are we now repaired or perhaps a little more confused when navigating on our GPS compared with our self-knowledge of West Street? Why is this not working? So, reparations focused more on recognition than redistribution. They were limited to victims who could testify under very narrow TRC definitions, leaving out many forms of apartheid harm. They often failed to engage communities in healing or ownership of the process. And many feel that reparations were politically instrumentalized, lacking sincerity and depth. And if I just look at it with my naked eye, it feels to me like when we moved from apartheid to the new democracy, we kind of put the small bandage over a broken bone. Let's put it this way again. If your house was burned down during apartheid, the riots and everything, and someone then later changed the name of the street that your house on and gave you 30,000 Rand, would you feel repaired? So, part three is then dealing with what needs to change individually, systemically, and as a nation. True healing will require a radical reimagining, not just interventions, but a re-foundation of who we are and how we live together. And to move us forward, I'd like to introduce a model, healing on 4 levels. Let's pause here because if we're serious about healing individually and as a society, we do need a framework that helps us understand where healing must happen. And here's one way to think about it. Healing not as a linear process, but as a spiral with 4 interlinked levels: interpersonal, communal, and structural. The first one, intrapersonal, focuses on healing within the self. So this is where we focus on safety, on dignity, on ancestral connection, on individual purpose. And some of these practices of healing can include journaling. This is where therapy does help, breath work, and those self-healing 101 rituals that we looked into in episode 5. Interpersonal at level 2. The focus here is then on healing in relationships. The key needs include trust, learning how to apply boundaries, and effective communication. Some of these practices can include forgiveness, family or grief circles, and some coaching and mentoring in groups. Level 3 is communal. The focus is on healing the community and the culture. It needs shared narratives, restoration of dignity, and collective pride. And some of these practices of healing here can include cultural revitalization, local projects, storytelling. And we've just started season 2 of Shaga Ilembe, and there's something very deep and cultural, even spiritual, when you just notice the energy around the re-storytelling of the Zulu nation and how it was formed, a story that's told primarily by South Africans, for South Africans, which was a different story altogether when the story was told from the narrative of the colonizer. So, this is a great example of the power of storytelling and how it can have a healing effect at a communal level. Now, imagine if we did that for different kinds of focus areas and tribes and cultural diversity that truly celebrates the Rainbow Nation as a larger part that's made out of very beautiful parts, as opposed to just this broad stroke of a Rainbow Nation that was probably forced onto us when we weren't ready and didn't fully realize what that meant. We realized the Rainbow Nation in an ongoing journey of healing and repair and reintegration. Which brings us to the last level of healing, which is the structural level, where the focus here is through justice and systems. Some of the key needs psychologically at this level is land, is equity, is recognition at all levels of leadership. And this is why practices such as reparation, land reform, policy change are important. But of course, as we have just unpacked these 4 levels of healing, we can also note that we can have beautiful policies and changes at a structural level. But if that is not embodied at an individual interpersonal level within myself, if I don't believe in some of these policies truly, then we have a problem. We're not truly and fully healing. If we can have a beautiful policy uh, around an equal South Africa, but interpersonally we are struggling to forgive, we are struggling to trust each other, that's also not a powerful and collective, holistic way to heal. And when we just unpack healing at all of these levels, we see just how important all of these are for us to feel whole, for us to feel well, and for us to feel human again. Think of it like a house with 4 rooms. If the room of the self is full of shame, if the room of your relationship is full of violence, if your community room is abandoned and your country systems are cracked, the whole house is actually unlivable. Healing means tending to each room. So that's the framework, that's the perspective, that's a way of looking into our healing journey and sort of outlining what the different components of what needs to happen. What can we then start doing individually? I think the topics of inner sovereignty, where we reclaim your story, your ancestry, your dignity, your destiny, are important, and healing practices that acknowledge collective trauma as an individual. Storytelling, ceremony, body based indigenous healing systems, etc., are important when we look into a future that embraces the culture of who we are and who we want to be, and unlearning inherited shame or even superiority narratives. So this is a healing not just for the victims of gross inequality, but also those that have inherited the trauma and the violence of their ancestors as well. Systemically, it's important that we build trauma-informed systems, schools, clinics, and the justice system. Our ongoing push for economic reparation is not just noise from uneducated politicians. Things like land reform are rooted in dignity and in true indigenous healing, not bureaucracy. So we need to decolonize knowledge and care, where we bring back the African philosophies that have worked, rituals and family-based healing systems into the center of public health. Because when this family system is tended to at all these different levels, that has a multiplier effect to the rest of society. And as a nation and continent, we can really learn from the leadership that's right now headed by people such as Captain Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso and others who have sort of followed Q around the continent, calling for true African sovereignty, economic independence from neo-colonial systems, rooted revolutionary care for people over profit. This is not just ideals, but applications that need to be instilled within the system. I'm seeing a rise in also young political leaders and voices who are displaying courageous leadership in our own country. I've seen Ashley Souls, Liam Jacobs, etc. And these young Africans are not the only ones, and they are not perfect, but they are starting with one of the first principles of healing, which is naming what is wrong. Now, imagine if every South African youth knew that healing actually occurs at these 4 levels: intrapersonal, interpersonal, communal, and structural. Imagine if we understood that healing is our birthright, that we can start with ourselves, but we're not supposed to end there. We've inherited more than pain. We've inherited also the wisdom to transform it. And this generation is proving it. They are remembering who they are, and they are refusing to walk quietly into a broken future. We can reimagine South Africa as a land of sovereign healers, not just survivors, as a place where healing is an infrastructure, not just an emergency patch or afterthought, where the nation does not gaslight us by telling us to move on, but rather invests, yes, in memorials, but also true reparations and youth-led truth-telling. So, if you want to talk about mental health, let's go deeper, beneath the iceberg, into the story, into the soil. Because well-being isn't just about what we feel, it's about what we remember, what we reclaim, and what we reimagine. And in our closing, I invite you to imagine this episode as more than just a conversation with an unhinged young Black psychologist from South Africa. Imagine it as a therapy session one, long overdue, not just for individuals, but for a continent, a people, a lineage. And like any good session, we end with an invoice, a symbolic mental health bill, not just for care rendered on this one session, but for the emotional debt never acknowledged. We send this bill to 5 recipients, each named with intention. The state, the inheritors of responsibility. To every post-colonial government that inherited the power of a liberated state, but not the will to heal its people. To leaders who fund monuments, but not mental health systems, who measure development in GDP, but ignore the trauma behind it. Number 2, the global north, the beneficiary of extraction. To former colonial powers who extracted land, labor, and legacy and left behind silence, shame, and structural poverty. You may have left physically, but the wounds you opened still bleeds. And the cost? It lives in our hospitals, in our schools, in our nervous systems. 3, the system that consumes the soul. To the economic orders that value productivity over peace, that reward burnout, glorifies hustle, and labels rest as laziness or a luxury. Here's the invoice for our lost sleep, fractured homes, and bodies that are tired but cannot afford to stop. Number 4, the collective we. This is the mirror and the mask. To ourselves, to the stories we've believed, that struggle is noble and asking for help is weakness, to the pride that made us suffer in silence, and the shame that made us isolate when we needed community. This part of the bill is an invitation to feel, to face, to forgive. And lastly, to the unseen ones, the ancestors and the unborn, to those who endured the pain we inherited and those yet to arrive, our ancestors who were never offered therapy but passed on their wisdom nonetheless, and our children who deserve to inherit tools for healing, not just trauma. This isn't a bill to you. It is a prayer for repair. So maybe the real question isn't who pays, but how do we begin to repair what was never properly named? Because mental health is political. Because injustice has a psychological price. And because healing, collective, spiritual, embodied healing, is the revolution. You've been listening to HumanFuel. Be kind to yourself, and may your healing ripple outward. Siyabonga. You have just refueled with HumanFuel, where healing meets conversation and transformation begins with presence. If this episode sparked anything in you, share it with someone you love or someone who needs a little light today. Follow us, subscribe, rate the show, and join the tribe across socials for truth, tools, and more fuel for your journey. Until next time, stay rooted, stay rising, and keep breathing. Siyabong.